It was supposed to be a fun family weekend on the lake, where Hillview Heights church pastor Steve Ayers and his family had grown up. But it didn't turn out that way. The gas tank on their houseboat had been filled, and Steve was charging the battery when he decided to check the connection, but forgot to unplug the battery charger first.
And I twist the positive part of the battery charger to get a better connection. When that happens, it throws a spark, and at that moment I hear a whooshing sound, and then boom, there's a ball of fire that has instantly consumed me.
The blast shredded the skin on Steve's hands, but what he didn't know at the time is that it had also burned 62% of his body.
And all I could see at that moment, Gene, was my hands. So I go to the front of the boat, and I let Elizabeth, she comes down immediately, and I looked at her and I said, I have blown myself up. Something's happened to my hands. And of course, she can see my whole body.
Sure.
Well, luckily, she's a nurse. So she goes immediately into nurse mode.
Elizabeth led Steve to their pickup half a mile away, then took off for the emergency room at the medical center in Bowling Green, phoning her brother, a surgeon, on the way.
When I would make contact, I would hear him screaming. And that was sort of like my vital sign. He was awake, alert, and he could talk and had airway. But they drove up, and Steve's smiling in the truck, hands up like this. And so we get him out of the truck. When he got into the emergency room, he continued that smile on his face and just talking to people. And to this day, people still are just amazed.
Steve credits an incredible rush of adrenaline, not knowing just how badly he was burned, and the pain relief medication he got, for his ability to talk with the crew flying him to Vanderbilt.
It was a beautiful day to fly, though. It really was. It's just a gorgeous day this happened. So I'm up in the copter, and I'm seeing all these places. You know, there's Portland, and there's Gallatin, and I'm seeing all the places that I've preached through.
Steve didn't lose consciousness until he got to Vandy. Then he woke up in the burn intensive care unit. Despite Steve being in such good shape, Elizabeth says the first 2 weeks at Vandy were touch and go.
It is so painful. You have to keep someone on a pain medication regimen so high. Steve also was in the point the first 72 hours where his kidneys were shutting down.
80% of the people who are burned over 60% of their bodies do not survive. But Steve did. It was a near-death experience, complete with a visit to the afterlife.
There was a moment of pain where I really knew that I was just in the presence of the Lord.
Steve will tell us about that experience and how it has affected his preaching in part 2 of my special report, Baptism by Fire, on 13 News at 10 tonight. At 5:05 p.m. on Thursday, June 9th, 2016, a spark from a battery charger on Steve Ayers' houseboat ignited an explosion and ball of fire that consumed the Hillview Heights church pastor. He was rushed to Vanderbilt Medical Center with burns over 62% of his body. 8 out of 10 people in that condition do not survive. But Steve did, and he credits the Lord for his recovery.
I don't have a description of the pain that went on other than this. I tell people it was like there were balls of just glass and shrapnel and metal, and they started at my hip. And so I could set it down a little bit, and I'd have to get my breath, and then finally, it'd take about 30 minutes before I could get my feet on the floor so I could stand up. And it got frustrating after a while. I was like, you know, God, am I just going to be in pieces the rest of my life?
And then it happened.
I did have an encounter. There was a moment of pain where I really knew that I was just in the presence of the Lord. And this was in the beginning of it.
That was Friday morning.
And I know the presence of the Lord, so I knew where I was. And the reason I knew I was in the presence of the Lord, Gene, I felt no pain. And I was at total peace. And so I'm like, Jesus, you never listen to me. You never have. But let's call it. You know, kids are grown, they got their wives. I said, I like this. Let's just stay here.
The world that is beyond us is much more real than this temporary place. This place doesn't last.
And as the Lord always does, he says, well, Stephen, don't you reckon? See, Jesus knows how to speak Southern because this is one of his Southern children. He said, don't you reckon we need to go back and finish that fight we started? And I remember going, I knew it. And as soon as I said that, boom, I'm back in my body. But I'm also with this. It's at that moment that I'm reassured, even though it doesn't feel like it, that, okay, somehow or another we're going to work this out.
It sounds to me like this experience has reinforced your belief in the strength of the Spirit.
Oh, that would be, yes, that would be a very clear statement. You know, I knew it was there. Now I know it's there.
And Steve began using that new intensity to witness to people before he even left the burn unit, a fact that was not lost on a fireman visiting the burn unit with a young arsonist.
He said, this young man that he just spoke to burned down a home 2 days ago. He's getting ready to go into juvenile detention, and we haven't been able to get him to understand the impact of what he's done. We thought bringing him here might help, but nothing helped until your dad spoke to him. And that really affirmed to Claycy and I and to our family that God wasn't finished with Steve.
This is what I've learned more than anything out of this, Gene. This has been my top learning lesson. Even if it's painful, that doesn't mean it's not good. Because through the pain, God begins to reveal himself. I don't know how I missed this since his son was crucified, which is a very painful experience. My confidence in Christ is everything.
And I want you to know tonight that in him, everything will be all right, no matter what.
At a moment when his life could have been easily snuffed out, when the pain was at its worst, Steve Ayer's faith was not only unshaken, it grew stronger, making him more determined than ever to touch as many lives as he can. To that end, Steve and Elizabeth have started a support group for burn survivors at Vanderbilt. It's part of the Phoenix Society, and it supports the burn victims and their families both during and after their hospitalization. They are working with the burn unit and other survivors, training to become peer-to-peer groups of volunteers.